Click. A single sound, barely audible in the hum of a tense room. But that tiny, mechanical snap would reverberate across the nation. In that instant, a stolen image froze a moment in time that few thoughts would ever be seen: a woman, strapped to the electric chair, her life extinguished by the cold current of justice. The woman was Ruth Snyder, once a seemingly ordinary Queen's housewife, now a name etched into the darker annals of American history. The photograph, taken covertly with a hidden camera strapped to a journalist's ankle, captured more than just a moment of execution. It captured a nation's obsession. An obsession with crime, with scandal, with the idea that someone so familiar, so domestic, could be capable of something so chilling. This was not just a case of murder. It was a media spectacle, a societal turning point, and a psychological enigma rolled into one. But how did Ruth Snyder, a mother raising her daughter in the quiet neighborhoods of Queens, find herself at the heart of one of the most sensational cases of the 1920s? And why did her final breath, broadcast across front pages the next morning, captivate and horrify the American public in equal measure? To understand the photograph, we must first understand the woman in it, and the web of betrayal, passion, and manipulation that led her from a domestic life to death row. This is not just a story, it's a twisted tapestry woven with love gone wrong, betrayal that ran bone deep, a ravenous press corps ready to pounce, and one chilling image that etched itself into the collective conscience of a nation. The tale of Ruth Snyder is one of those rare moments in history where private sin collides with public spectacle, where the ordinary morphs into the infamous. Ruth Snyder appeared, on the surface, to be just another housewife in 1920s Queens. Her life was a routine of domestic tasks, child-rearing, and dutiful appearances beside her husband, Albert, an emotionally detached man who, by many accounts, never truly loved her. Theirs was a marriage marked more by obligation than affection, a silent battlefield where discontent quietly festered behind closed doors. And Ruth, feeling caged by the expectations of her role and the void in her personal life, sought an escape. That escape came in the form of Henry Judd Gray, a meek, bespectacled corset salesman with a flair for flattery and a craving for danger. Their affair, sparked in the smoky back rooms of Manhattan hotels, was far more than a fleeting indulgence. It was intoxicating, illicit, dangerous. And as their passion deepened, so too did their desperation. But what began as a secret tryst quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. They weren't just plotting rendezvous, they were plotting murder. Ruth, resentful of Albert's control and emboldened by her lover, began scheming. Together, she and Judd concocted a plan to end Albert's life and collect on a life insurance policy, one that Ruth had forged, naming herself as the beneficiary. What followed was not the execution of a carefully laid-out scheme, but rather a clumsy, panicked killing in the dead of night, one marked by poor planning, botched details, and a trail of evidence that screamed guilt. In the aftermath came a frenzied cover-up, so amateurish it was almost theatrical, yet it couldn't shield them from the legal reckoning that was fast approaching. Their arrest triggered a media explosion unlike anything seen before. Suddenly, Ruth Snyder was no longer just a woman accused of murder. She was front-page fodder, dissected, vilified, and immortalized in the court of public opinion. But let's be clear, this wasn't just a murder case. It was never only about who did what, or how. It was about something much deeper, something that struck at the very soul of 1920s America. This was a story about gender roles in crisis, about power slipping through carefully manicured fingers, about a society obsessed with morality while secretly addicted to scandal. It was about the dangers of desire when it clashes with social expectations. And more than anything, it was about the media, hungry, relentless, and unregulated, reshaping Ruth Snyder into a villain before the jury ever reached a verdict. The press didn't just report on Ruth Snyder, they rebranded her. Gone was the image of a discontent housewife. In its place stood the archetype of the femme fatale. cold, calculating, sexually empowered, and therefore dangerous. They painted her in harsh ink and sharpened headlines, transforming a deeply complex woman into a cautionary tale. She became the embodiment of what happens when a woman steps outside her proper role in society. Her affair wasn't just adultery, it was rebellion. Her crime wasn't just murder, it was a moral offense. And then came that photo. Taken inside the hushed, locked walls of Sing Sing prison during the final, irreversible moment of her life. The photograph, a grainy, ghostly capture of Ruth in the electric chair, was snapped without permission, using a miniature camera smuggled in and tied to a journalist's ankle. One click, and Ruth's execution was immortalized. It would become one of the most infamous crime images in American history. But why did this case seize the public imagination the way it did? What made people line up for newspapers, gawk at headlines, and dissect every sordid detail for months on end? Today, we're peeling back the layers, not just to recount what happened, but to understand why it mattered so much. We'll look at Ruth Snyder's descent from housewife to headline, the psychological forces at play, and the society that didn't just judge her, but used her. Through the dual lenses of psychology and sociology, we'll explore not only her crime, but our collective response to it. Because sometimes, what a society chooses to obsess over says more than the crime itself ever could. Ruth Snyder wasn't born into infamy. In fact, for much of her life, she was entirely ordinary, a suburban wife, a doting mother, and by all outward appearances, the image of 1920s domesticity. The kind of woman who smiled at neighbors, kept a tidy home, and lived within the quietly suffocating boundaries society had set for her. But appearances, as we know, are often the perfect disguise. Ruth Snyder wasn't the kind of woman society feared. Until she became the kind of woman it couldn't stop talking about. Behind the curtains of her middle-class Queens home, Ruth lived a life of emotional deprivation. Her husband, Albert Snyder, was a rigid, joyless man still mourning a former lover, whose photograph he allegedly kept displayed long after his marriage to Ruth. Their relationship was cold, distant, void of passion or warmth. Ruth was not just unfulfilled, she was trapped. Trapped in a marriage that stifled her, in a home that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. And then came Judd Gray, a mild-mannered corset salesman with thinning hair and a nervous disposition. He wasn't a movie star or a millionaire. But to Ruth, he was freedom. Their affair wasn't just a dalliance, it was a lifeline. Judd listened. He doted. He offered her something Albert never did, attention and a sense of power. What began as an escape soon became an obsession. And like all obsessions, it demanded more. But this wasn't just a case of lovers caught up in passion. It evolved into something far more calculated, cold, even. Ruth didn't strike out in one spontaneous act of rage. No, she tried and failed several times to kill her husband before the final act. Poison hidden in his food. Gas leaks intentionally set in the house. Tampering with the mechanics of his car. Each attempt more desperate than the last, each failure sharpening her resolve. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about liberation at any cost. And finally, on the night of March 20th, 1927, Ruth put her plan into action. With Judd Gray hiding in the house, the couple waited until Albert had fallen asleep. Then, in a grim duet, they staged a burglary. They bound and gagged Albert, strangling him with picture wire, a method that was not only cruel, but chillingly personal. It was a murder committed not with a gunshot in the dark, but with their bare hands and cold intent. They ransacked the house to simulate a break-in, hoping the scene would mislead investigators. But as we'll see, their plan fell apart almost immediately. The murder was messy. The lies were thin. And Ruth, once a woman no one feared, was about to become a national obsession. Extra. Extra. Read all about it. That was the cry echoing through the streets as newsboys waved fresh headlines in the air, each one screaming the latest scandalous update from the Snyder Gray trial. From the moment Ruth was arrested, the press didn't just report on her case, they devoured it. And with every headline, every breathless column, they helped transform a tragic murder into a public spectacle. This wasn't just a courtroom proceeding, it was theater. A national obsession. Journalists flooded the courthouse, typewriters clacking into the night. Artists sketched every raised eyebrow, every tear shed, every glance exchanged between Ruth and Judd. The details were too juicy, too lurid to ignore. A bored housewife turned killer. A lover in a corset business. A murder staged like a dime novel. It was irresistible. But make no mistake, Ruth Snyder was not just on trial for murder. She was on trial for who she was. The press didn't see her as a grieving widow, or a complicated woman driven to desperation. No. They painted her as a dangerous archetype, the manipulative, sexually empowered woman who used her femininity as a weapon. The femme fatale. And in this narrative, Judd Gray, who willingly participated in the killing, was conveniently cast as her puppet. Weak, pathetic, and tragically under her spell. Every courtroom detail became fodder for moral commentary. Her clothes were scrutinized. Her expressions dissected. Her motherhood questioned. And day by day, the media stripped away her humanity, recasting her as a cautionary tale about what happens when women step out of line. For readers across America, Ruth became a symbol of modern female rebellion gone wrong, and society was determined to make an example of her. But beneath the screaming headlines and tabloid sensationalism, deeper, more uncomfortable questions lingered. Why did Ruth provoke such an extreme reaction? Was it truly the crime that horrified the public? Or was it her audacity to be more than a quiet, obedient wife? Did society condemn her for murder, or for daring to rewrite the role assigned to her by gender, class, and tradition? The Snyder case wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was a reflection of a country grappling with the shifting sands of gender expectations. A country afraid of women who wanted more, and willing to make martyrs of those who tried to take it. The morning of January 12, 1928, was cold and still. Outside the gates of Sing Sing prison, reporters gathered like vultures, their breath visible in the winter air, waiting for the news they already knew was coming. Inside, Ruth Snyder walked her final steps. The once vivacious housewife, now stripped of all identity but one, condemned. Her face was blank, her lips tight. Whatever fear, regret, or resignation she carried in those last moments, none of it would be officially recorded. No photos were allowed in the death chamber. That was the rule. But the rules were about to be broken. Among the witnesses that morning was Tom Howard, a journalist working undercover for the New York Daily News. Hidden beneath the cuff of his trousers was a small, modified camera, rigged to a shutter he could release with a squeeze of his leg. It was a crude setup, high risk and low tech, but it would change the course of media history. As Ruth was strapped to the electric chair, straps tightened across her arms, the metal helmet lowered over her head, Howard made no move. Then, as the executioner flipped the switch and the current surged through her body, click. One press. One flash. One frame. He captured what no one else dared to, the exact moment of death. The following morning, that photo was on the front page of the Daily News. It was grainy, blurred, haunting. You could barely make out her form, jolted and restrained, mid-execution. But it didn't matter. The image was explosive. America had never seen anything like it before, and would never see it again. People were horrified, fascinated. Some bought the paper just to gawk. Others protested in disgust. Critics condemned the sensationalism. Preachers called it an abomination. But the paper? It sold out. Fast. The photo didn't just capture Ruth Snyder's death. It captured the soul of a society teetering between morality and spectacle. She was no longer just a woman, or a killer, or a story. She was a moment. A symbol of how far the media would go to feed a public addicted to scandal. That photo didn't make us understand Ruth Snyder any better. It didn't answer questions about guilt, or justice, or gender. But it did something far more powerful. It froze America's obsession in time. 1 second of life, one blur of death, immortalized not in sympathy, but in shock. And perhaps that's the cruelest twist of all. Ruth Snyder was erased not by the electric chair, but by the image of it. Now here's where we want to hear from you. Ruth Snyder's case still divides opinion nearly a century later. Was she a cold-hearted killer? Someone who meticulously planned her husband's death with no remorse? Or was she a woman pushed to the edge, trapped in a stifling marriage, manipulated by her lover, and ultimately a casualty of the rigid gender roles of her time? And what about that infamous photo? Was it an act of bold journalism, exposing the raw, brutal reality of capital punishment? Or was it a line crossed, a moment that should have remained private, exploited in the name of profit and sensation? Your perspective matters. These stories aren't just about what happened back then, they're about the values we carry now. So tell us in the comments, was Ruth Snyder a villain, a victim, or something far more complex? And do you think the press had the right to show her final moment to the world? Let's start a conversation. And if you're someone who loves peeling back the layers of history, uncovering not just what happened, but why, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so you never miss a deep dive into the dark, fascinating corners of true crime and human psychology. Ruth Snyder's story lingers not because of the brutality of the crime, or even the drama of her trial. It lingers because it exposed so many raw, uncomfortable truths about the world she lived in, and, in many ways, the world we still inhabit today. Her case wasn't just about a murder in Queens. It became a national reflection on how we judge women, how we respond to scandal, and how the media can shape, or distort, our perceptions of guilt and humanity. As the electric chair flickered and that infamous photograph made its way onto newsstands, America wasn't just watching the death of a woman. It was watching itself. Its obsession with punishment, its hunger for spectacle, its struggle with empathy. Ruth's face, once anonymous, became a canvas onto which the public projected its fears, its judgments, and its fascination with the forbidden. Because true crime, at its heart, is never just about blood and betrayal. It's about context. About pressure points. About systems and psyches. It's about the why behind the what. And when we ask why, when we really dig, we find echoes of ourselves, our society, and our deepest human dilemmas. So thank you for joining us on this journey, through the crime, the trial, the media storm, and the haunting photo that still shocks today. Stay curious. Stay critical. And above all, stay human. This is The Crime Keeper, unlocking the vaults of true crime with a lens of psychology, history, and humanity. Until next time.